Last year, we started a new presentation series called Talking Tech at CMoA. It's a way to bring topics that a lot of us find really interesting, but it's hard to find places to hear these topics unless you go to a chamber meeting or you're inside the industry and you're going to go to some kind of industry function. And we just wanted to find a way to bring current topics, vintage topics. We even have a book club, just a way to meet our audience in all phases of life and where they might be. So today we're really, really fortunate to have Bill Nussey join us. His book, Freeing Energy. You can see mine is a little bent up. I've read through it several times. This person has been in the tech industry here in Atlanta from the beginning, founded a company, Silverpop, sold it to IBM, and as I understand it, had a real interest in energy and went out to write this book, and has since, I think, stayed in the sector and is supporting a lot of people and a lot of ideas, and I think we're just really, really fortunate to have him here to share a little bit today. I hope you'll stick around, purchase a book if you don't have one. He'll sign it if you brought your own like I did, and we'll start now. So thanks, Bill.
So Bill Nussey here, lifetime tech nerd, entrepreneur, almost entirely computer person. I'm recently in the energy space. Walking down that aisle there is like walking through my childhood. And I have several of those things there are things I actually used. And I don't know if you know this, Rena, but I for the last 30 years, I've been collecting computers. So nothing close to this here. I almost brought my original Apple Newton, which is still working. So my basement looks more like boxes, but stuff like this. So my name is Bill Nussey. By day, I am a partner at a venture capital firm called Tech Square Ventures, and I run a program for us called Engage, which brings together all the large corporates in Atlanta, UPS, Delta, Coca-Cola, Cox, Georgia Pacific, Georgia Power, and we basically help them invest in startups. We invest in startups on their behalf. But for the 5 years prior to that, I wrote researched and wrote the book I'm going to tell you about. Found some eye-popping realities about the state of the energy system in the world and the United States. And as I was doing it, having been a informal student of the history of computing, the parallels were remarkable. And in my book, as I was preparing for this, I was reminded just how many parallels I drew from the computing world to what I'll do today, and I did in the book, is predict where energy is going to go. When I was very young, early middle school, my family didn't have much money, and we came across $1,000, and it was a long story, but it had my name on it essentially. And so my parents said, which is a lot of money for us in the late 70s, there's $1,000. What do you want to do with it, son? You can get a new bicycle or put it towards college. And for some reason, I said I want to buy a computer. And we bought a TRS-80 Model 1, 4K RAM, a cassette deck, software loader. And I say this with true honesty, when I sat in front of that thing, it was the first time in my entire life anything made complete sense to me. Everything had always been a little off for me, and I didn't quite understand people and sports and all these other things. But the moment I sat in front of that computer, the entire arc of my life changed. And when I was in front of that computer, it would do the things that I wanted it to do. It was a way to express myself, and it changed my entire life. So I have been a tech entrepreneur most of my life. I've been the CEO of software companies. I've exited many, took one public, occasional venture capitalist. Please accept my apologies. And I did it for a while, swore I'd never do it again. I do it again, never say never. And my firm invests a bit into the energy tech space, but we also invest in cybersecurity and supply chain tech. But energy is my passion, and I think a year or two now, will probably be the most active climate tech investors in the Southeast. So it was not necessarily a goal. We look for the best investments of all categories. But believe me, when I find a climate tech company that fits our investing thesis, which most don't, but some do, we tend to jump on it. So I want to tell you what I learned in 5 years of traveling the world, interviewed 400 experts all over the planet Earth on energy. I sat in the headquarters of the largest solar manufacturer in China, interviewed the founder about how Chinese companies are so great at solar. I sat in mud huts in Africa with people that had gotten their first solar battery light, the first electric system they'd ever seen. I climbed to the top of a wind turbine, popped out the top, looked around. I'm not afraid of heights, but I was. It was nuts. And I want to tell you some of the things that really surprised me and maybe give you a sense of where energy is going, because most people don't see what I'm going to tell you. The book's been very well received. It is provocative. I'm just curious, is anybody here from the energy space? I know you are. Anybody else? So you're not going to find this as provocative. You're computer people. You're going to say, well, duh. But if you take this to someone in the energy space, the electricity space, they're going to think you're crazy. And so let's just jump in. Technology has changed everything about the world, with one sole exception. The electric grid today is nearly identical to what it was 120 years ago. And so I like to tell the story in the book. I love this stupid TV show, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, movie. And I literally think about this, like, wouldn't it be cool to go back in time and to bring forward some of these people that invented everything we take for granted? I'm a big fan of the Wright brothers, and I would love to bring them forward only 100 years and show them a 747 or an F-16 and say, look at this idea that you proved that no one else thought. Everyone said powered flight was impossible, and yet the world is entirely different. I would love to go to Alexander Graham Bell and bring him forward and say, you know that thing you did? Watson, come here. I now have a thing in my hand that allows me to talk to 8 billion people within 30 seconds and access the sum total of all human knowledge instantaneously because you called Watson 100 years ago. Love to go back to all the variations of the computer world back then and bring them forward and tell them. But you know what? If I went to Thomas Edison or Nikola Tesla or Sam Insull or George Westinghouse, what I consider the forefathers of the electric industry, and I brought them forward to 2024, I would take them to a substation. I would take them to a power plant, a coal power plant, or even a gas power plant. And they would say, I don't get it. This is 60 hertz, high voltage transformers. This is exactly what we are doing back 120 years ago. There is literally nothing different other than there's, in some cases, instrumentation. The system is exactly what was architected. And they would be rightfully frustrated that all the other technologies, flight, computing, communications, have been entirely reinvented because of technology. Their industry has remained utterly static. If this was an energy audience, I would tell you why it's remained static and tell you how we might get around it, but we're not going to get into that today because suffice to say that there are electricity in the United States and most places in the world, but electricity is only one of the 3 remaining government-granted monopolies in the United States. It is alcohol, gambling, and electricity. Those are the 3. You find another, find a 4th. I've challenged people. There's no 4th government-granted monopolies in the United States other than alcohol, gambling, and electricity. And if you look at, so I'm not going to go down this rat hole because I get very passionate about it, but if you look at all the R&D expenditures by every single industry, from museums to hairdressers to microchips to doctors, the single lowest R&D percentage of revenue of any industry in the United States is electricity. It is lower than any other industry. And you simultaneously look at all those same industries and pharmaceuticals and add in every industry you can think, and you index it not against R&D but against lobbying. Electric industry is the #1 highest percentage of its industries, highest percentage of its revenues in lobbying. And these are provocative thoughts, and I wouldn't be surprised if none of you have heard either of these before. But in my book, I have, I think, 300 citations, multiple citations for both of those that are really beyond question. They're government bureaus and things like that. Just no one pulled these stories together and told it in sort of a narrative like I did with the book. So I want to make just a point about how powerful your industry, the computer industry, is. That's a picture of my dad right there. In the last operating UNIVAC, they were tearing it down. He passed away many years ago, but he kind of was a bit of a nerd, not much of a nerd, but it was a bit of a nerd, and I got a little bit of my nerdism from him. And if you think back, that UNIVAC computer was 8 tons. It had 5,000 switches, vacuum tubes at the time, $10 million in current dollars, and it did 1,900 operations per second. So some people can type in calculators that fast, I think. But the Mac laptop, which I photoshopped in there, just to be funny, 16 billion transistors, 3 pounds, 36 billion operations per second. We kind of take it for granted. You know, when Gordon Moore, and I have a story about him in the book, the inventor or the person who created Moore's law, when he first said it, he wasn't trying to be prescient, omniscient about the future. He just said, I made up a crazy number and thought it might be the case in 10 years. To have imagined for decade after decade after decade Moore's law would continue to prove true was beyond his wildest dream. And there is no other industry, including energy, that will have the same degree of cost performance gains that computing has. And every industry, as Mark Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz says, becomes a computing industry, or as he says, software eats the world. And in the energy industry, as I wrap up this presentation this morning, or this afternoon, I'm going to tell you how even the energy industry is going to become the software industry. So how do we get here? Every single energy system that you use, with a tiny few exceptions, and 10 years ago with no exceptions, were powered by fuels. Started with coal, actually wood a long time ago, and coal, ultimately natural gas, nuclear. In the 1960s was supposed to be too cheap to meter. It's now one of the most expensive ways to generate electricity ever invented, but it was supposed to be cheap. But every single thing has in common that it's powered by fuels. It's so intrinsic to how we think about energy that we don't really give it a second thought. I don't quote this in the book because it was a contentious statistic, but there are serious researchers that have found that 1/3 of the U.S. military budget is simply to protect the delivery of fuel around the world and largely the United States. So fuel isn't just this stuff you pull out of the ground, but it's an entire multi-trillion-dollar industry on its own. And we're not even going to touch on the environmental issues, because you will find, if you do read my book, I don't ever talk about the environment. This is a book about economics and business. I strongly believe that renewable energy will save the future of the planet, but a lot of people don't believe that, and so I didn't touch on it because I didn't want people to mistake my motivation for writing the book as some kind of save the planet. This is a run better business, make more money book. So again, depending on what you read and how your worldview comes together, it's pretty inevitable that it's very clear that renewable energy is catching on very quickly. It's extraordinarily inexpensive. I'll talk a little bit about it in a minute. Its low cost is broadly overlooked for a variety of reasons. But I think that the shift is inevitable. In 2023, we put up twice as much renewable energy as all renewable energy built in all the years before. So renewable energy is absolutely taking off. It's almost all solar, by the way. By the end of today, you'll know why. But the thing that everybody misses is this simple fact. And if you remember only one thing today about our energy system, is that solar and batteries, which are powering the future of the world's energy systems, are technologies. They're not fuels. This is a step change of the highest order. This is a way bigger step from analog to digital computing. This is as profound as it gets, because the economics for 150 years on all energy systems are based on the procurement and distribution of fuel. For the first time ever, we have energy systems that do not generate fuel. And much more importantly, do not require fuel. You might also put geothermal and wind in that category, but those are not technologies. And there's technologies at them, but ultimately they're giant power plants which have to bear some of the same economic challenges as a coal plant. Doesn't have the same environmental damage, thank goodness, but it's still a giant, expensive, slow thing to build. For the first time in history, we have an energy system that can be made in factories by the thousands and millions and billions. And this is where I think the comparison to computers starts to become relevant. If you think about the shift from mainframes to laptops to mobile phones, and I see a couple of people here old enough to have appreciated that transition, we are going to see, and we are seeing the same transition from gigantic power plants to small-scale energy systems. In my book, I call them local energy. Others call them on-site energy. But these are small-scale energy systems that have the same economic drivers as PCs did over mainframes. Now, there are still mainframes in the world. I worked at IBM for 2 years. I ran strategy for them. I can tell you mainframes are really critical to IBM's success, more than most people know because they don't publish the numbers. But mainframes still are the economic driver at IBM, so the world needs mainframes. I just heard that a very large credit card company just bought mainframe number 8 and 9 to power their core transaction system. So mainframes are still around, but their influence has shifted from being the center of the universe of computing to a peripheral, tiny part that's a butt of a lot of jokes. And I actually think we'll have large power plants for a long, 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 long time. But we are barely scratching the surface, the potential of these small-scale systems, and they are derided universally by everybody. They're proponents. People that love rooftop solar will still make fun of it because most people have not grasped the underlying economic principle that I'm going to wrap up our conversation with today. The punchline is local energy. So these are small-scale systems. You can think of them as farm-to-table for electrons. The systems are installed locally, often by local people, and they provide the power usually within 0 feet or a couple hundred feet of the places they're being used, and it's a completely different economic model. And it comes in 4 forms that I talk about in the book. Community solar, which is within 5 or 10 miles of here, you'd have a mid-sized system, 2 or 3 acres, and it'd be providing power, some power for the local residents. Rooftop, which everyone's familiar with. Building integrated, which is still on the horizon, but imagine windows and roof tiles. Instead of shingles that are made of asphalt, they're made of solar. Not putting solar panels on top of your asphalt roof, but the roof itself is solar. And then microgrids and batteries, which are really the final step, which is obviously there's thousands of microgrids today. I've invested in one of the top microgrid companies in the country, but this is still a fraction of a percent in terms of the energy generation. So this may blow your mind. The price of solar has dropped 400 times since the first solar cell was put on a satellite, American satellite. In fact, that's how America pulled ahead in the satellite race with the USSR. All the USSR satellites to date had been short-lived because they ran on batteries. So Sputnik only ran for a few weeks, and then the beeping signal that we all may remember died off. Maybe it was a couple months, but I think it was a few weeks. So the United States, I believe, was the first country to put a satellite up that was powered by solar. And it ran for years and years and years and years. And that actually created the beginning of the solar R&D that has changed the planet, and it's just starting. But solar has gone down more than any other source, and it's now considered the least expensive way to generate electricity that's ever been designed in human history. And we'll talk a minute about nuclear and offshore wind and things like that, but solar, among all these, solar is the only one that you can make in a factory line. So let me give you a sense of what this is. The term that I use in the book is economies of volume. Now, most of you have heard the term economies of scale. Now, orally, you may not have heard economies of scale. But basically what it means is that when you build something bigger and bigger and bigger, each thing it does gets cheaper. So if you build a bigger factory, each thing that comes out of the factory is cheaper than if you have a small factory. And economies of scale have defined the entire world of energy. Bigger power plants like nuclear are the biggest power plants. bigger airplanes, bigger factories. So economies of scale have been the defining driver of economic improvement for energy and many other businesses for 100 years. So over all of human history, we've made about 440 nuclear power plants. A little more than that, we've decommissioned many of them, several of them. We made about 2,400 coal plants. So coal would be getting a little cheaper, but people started looking at what's coming out the top of coal plants and decided, like if you were in Beijing 12 years ago, you couldn't barely breathe, so they said we should capture that stuff, and that took the price of coal plants up very high. So coal is cheap if you don't care about 1% of your population dying of lung cancer. You can get them cleaner. They're still not clean, but they're cleaner now. But no one's building coal plants except in China in the world. Natural gas is the new favorite thing. We've built about 4,000 natural gas plants. Now, what's cool about natural gas plants is that they piggyback on top of decades of aviation. Fun fact, in case you didn't know it, natural gas plants are based on turbines, the same turbine technology that powers jet planes. And so all that research and all the materials and how do you have a thing spin at 10,000 RPM that can withstand 3,000 degrees of temperature, well, that work has been done for airplanes for years, and it directly switched over to natural gas plants. They're much larger, but the ideas and the research play directly. So, and you could actually make the turbines. Some of them are bigger than this room, but a lot of them are smaller, and you can make them in a factory, and you can put them on a train, and you can deliver them. So if you make 10 of them at a time, it's actually way cheaper. But you notice in that graph I had a minute ago, none of those have gone down much. Wind has gone down a lot. Why has wind gone down a lot? Because we made 500,000 wind turbines. Has anyone here been to a wind turbine factory? I'm going to guess nobody. Okay, so you have? All right. So I've been to some factories that make them, and they make them, they're enormous, the size, some of I forget the top part, I forget what they call it, but they're half the size of this room, and they're enormous. But they make them on these giant rollers and big cranes, and they ship them out on ships and big special made trucks. And so, but they make them in volume, and that's the reason that wind has become so cheap, because you can make them in factories in high volume, 500,000 and growing quickly. At the heart of every solar system is a solar cell. We've made more of those than we've made of the other things. In fact, as of 2 years ago, we've made 120 billion solar cells. And that number's probably double that 2 years later, because the market is just absolutely taking off. So you ask yourself, every time I make a nuclear power plant, it takes 10, 15 years to make one. How much am I learning that I can apply to the next one? Especially if I'm only going to make, there's maybe 30 nuclear power plants under construction in the United States, right? In the world, none in the United States, mostly in China. How much do you get to learn? You get to try something. Imagine you're going to make 100 billion of anything. One of the scientists I interviewed said that humanity knows more about the physics and chemistry of silicon, which is at the heart of solar, and microchips, than any other material on the planet Earth. We have studied silicon more deeply than anything that you can get on the planet Earth. Biological, non-biological, we've studied it more than anything else. And so we have made 120, imagine how much better you're going to get, even the tiniest tweaks. And the history of solar price going down is that every couple billion they make, they go back and say, well, we can make this giant change. And every couple 100 million, they make this small change. They get better and better across the planet Earth. And next thing you know, these things have gone down 400 times since that satellite that made Sputnik look dumb. And here's the cool part. If you look at the price of solar today, particularly local solar on your house, if RENA said, listen, we want to put solar on our roof here at the museum to power it, it's actually pretty consistent across the United States, about $3 a watt. So your average house system is 8 kilowatts, so it's about $24,000. It's surprisingly consistent. So you got to buy the equipment, you got to have someone install it, design it, file the regulatory paperwork, blah, 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 $3. Now here's the part that, again, you can find this data 50 different places, but even people who live in the industry every single day don't know the fact that if you take that exact same system, if you take that same, if RENA puts up a 20 kilowatt system up here, and she instead decides to put the museum in Australia, same exact solar panels, same exact wiring, same exact inverter, same people on the roof, wiring and designing, that system is going to cost $1 a watt instead of $3 a watt. Everything is absolutely identical. So what is the difference? Australia had this crazy idea that they should have national policy, not incentives. This is net of incentives. This has got nothing to do with whether the government hates solar or loves solar. This is just the cost. They said, we're just going to make it super easy for installers to do their job. So in the U.S., when I had put solar on my roof, the power company and the Cobb County where I live, the inspectors, they all made multiple trips to my house. And every time they came out, they said, we'll be here sometime in the morning of this day. And so the head of my solar installer had to sit in his truck in my driveway. I said, come on into my house, get some coffee. No, he's waiting out there. He has no idea when the Cobb inspector is going to show up. The guy eventually shows up. And why do you have to have the most senior, most expensive person? Because the Cobb inspector could ask any question. He could ask a question about the design. He could ask a question about the wire over here. And they needed the most senior person to answer. So the majority of the money I paid for the most senior person in my solar installer was sitting in my driveway. Now, he probably did emails and things, but it was largely unproductive. That is unique to the United States. There are 3,000 different regulatory regimes in the United States for installing solar. There's one in Australia. In Australia, as long as you're choosing from one of hundreds of known vendors that the government has approved, the installer simply puts the solar panel up, she gets out her phone, she takes a picture, tap, 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 she takes another picture, tap, 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 and that simultaneously goes to the power company, simultaneously goes to the regulator, and within 3 or 4 minutes, the system's live. That's $2 difference. Between $3 in the United States, $1 in Australia, $2 difference is all that red tape. So this is why I'm optimistic that we can, even in my dark days where I think the government's sometimes unfunctional, once people realize that this is possible, they're just going to ask their local county to fix this. And this is going to happen. There's too many examples of what already works. But the coolest thing I like about local energy specifically, as it is beginning to unleash the same kind of innovative spirit, the garage shops, the inventors, the dreamers, the crazy people, as the old Apple commercial said, that's Steve Jobs and Wozniak. I'm guessing this is the room where every single person knows who they are. A lot of people have to explain. So, and that kind of spirit is, you're not seeing that for nuclear power plants. You're not seeing that for gas power plants. You are seeing that for local energy. And before the market crash in 2022, investing in energy tech was one of the largest areas of venture capital of all kinds. It was up there with crypto, if anyone remembers that. Now all of it's eclipsed by AI. But the venture dollars will continue to be massive. It's one of the largest areas of venture investment in the world, because the opportunity to do what these two clowns did and to do it to the energy business is just as real. Not just to save money, not to make corporations more efficient or bring consumers a new gadget, but to literally change the structure of how the world works. And that's why I love this space. That is why I wrote a book on energy, and that my book is written for people that want to be energy entrepreneurs. So as I wrap it up, you think about laptops and phones versus mainframes. They're way cheaper. They're incredibly available. And they innovate faster and at a rate that is staggering if you compared to the rate at which some of these old machines, as innovative as Cray was, and they were wildly innovative, they're nothing compared to how rapidly the PC industry innovated. Local energy is exactly like that. It attracts the same kind of crazy innovator, investor types. It benefits from the same kind of technology acceleration, and it is just beginning, which is why I wrote the book. And in the beginning of the book, I dedicated it to the 10,000 entrepreneurs and innovators that haven't yet entered the industry, who collectively are going to change the future of energy in the United States and the world. I'm going to wrap up on one big provocative thought, but I did forget to say something about solar that I should have mentioned, and I think I just missed it. I mentioned that natural gas, which, by the way, the environmental people, the new term is fossil gas, which I've just learned. Don't a brilliant move. I went back and studied the history of how the industry called it natural gas. Brilliant move. But it is technically fossil gas, and that's what they're trying to rebrand it. We'll see if it works. It built on the back of jet engine development. Well, it turns out the silicon solar, there's other kinds, but silicon's 95% of all solar, it was built on the back of the microchip business. So for decades before we started making large volumes of solar cells, we had figured out how to get silicon, which is the second or third most common element in the planet Earth, and refine it to levels that would have been considered impossible 100 years ago to get near perfect crystalline silicon, which is what's required in a microchip, and to make that at scale. So the fact that we can make hundreds of billions of chips that sit inside our phones and laptops and make them with quality and low error rates, that same technology transferred perfectly to solar cells. So another advantage that solar cells had over every other kind of energy generation was they're building on top of 40 years of trillions of dollars of investment in figuring out how to make microchips. So it was an unfair advantage, but we'll take it. So I'm going to wrap up on the most provocative idea in my book, and I didn't actually get into it as much as I wanted, but for this crowd, I hope you guys dig it. The energy internet. So if you want to be impressed by me, I actually own the URL for this, just saying. If you go to this, it takes you to the book. But the parallels that I mentioned about mainframes to laptops and all that, those are tiny parallels compared to the parallel of a future energy system that works and operates exactly like the internet does. A couple people here might be old enough to remember when we were in elementary school and we did for me, elementary school duck and cover, nuclear war is going to happen, so we hide under our desks. That's great. Oh, I love it. But anyway, we did. And the U.S. war machine, the business operations of the United States relied heavily on communications. And back at the time, nearly all communications in the United States were owned and operated by AT&T as a monopoly. The largest ever single monopoly in the history of the United States, dwarfs any of the utilities. And the parallels between that monopoly and electric monopolies are covered heavily in my book. And if this was a communications group, I would tell you all about those parallels, but my heart is not with communications, it's with computers. So glad to be here. But they knew they had this intrinsic problem that you couldn't, if there was a nuclear attack or a large-scale attack in the United States, that the communication systems would be the first thing they went after. We see that in the Ukraine with the energy and communication systems in Russia. So how do you make a system that's resilient against attack? And you make a completely distributed system. And I didn't get into it as much in the book as I wanted, but if you have not read about the mountains, political mountains and policy mountains and funding mountains that the early internet people, the ARPANET, had to surmount to get to the internet, it's really inspiring. It's probably a lot of documentaries, I don't know of any, but it's a great story. But they designed the system exclusively around resilience, so that when the system went out, one portion of it, one node, one central piece, whatever, when that piece was taken out by a bomb, the entire system would continue to work. And one of the stories I want to tell you, can I borrow that book, Rena? There's I was going to read this section to you. I don't remember, I'm going to look up the page real quick. It's called The Energy Internet. It's, let's see. I thought I'd find it fast. All right, Bill, hold on, I wrote this. Oh, there it is, page 324. So I'm going to just read you this, because this is, I'm actually genuinely curious if any of you have heard this story before, because there's a couple stories in the book that I kind of put together from little pieces that I'd never read before, and this is one of my favorite ones, and it's really applicable here. This is the beginning, the first internet packet ever sent. This is a great story. Has anyone heard this before, or even bits of it? You may have heard the pieces, but the total story I have not seen. I'm just going to read it if you'll forgive me. On October 29th, 1969, just 3 months after Neil Armstrong took the first steps on the moon, researchers at UCLA in Los Angeles telephoned their counterparts 350 miles away at Stanford Research Institute, now SRI, in Palo Alto. They wanted to talk live as they attempted a remote login using the new system ARPANET, the precursor to the modern internet. This is the very first attempt to send packetized digital data over a distance. As a graduate student at UCLA named Charlie Klein, who's probably on your wall somewhere, typed in an L for login and asked the SRI researcher over the telephone, "Did you get an L?" SRI replied, "Yes." So Klein took another breath. He typed an O and asked, "Did you get an O?" And again, SRI said, "Yes, we see the O." Then Klein typed G. The system crashed. An hour later, they rebooted everything, and Klein retyped login, and that time it worked, and the internet was born. But here's the fun part. The internet's first communication was a perfect reflection of what it has become since. The very first message was LO, low. Lo and behold, the very first internet message was low, and it was so prescient about how impactful those two letters would be to the future of everything we take for granted. The part that I love, and I'd never read anywhere else, was the first three letters sent over the internet. LOL. And so the combination of low and LOL is the first things that ever were sent over the internet on the planet Earth. The juxtaposition absolutely warms my heart, and I think covers every single thing about what the internet has become in the 50 years since. To just inspire you that for those of you that are in the computer industry, you are converging and going to eclipse what has traditionally been this sort of this big industry, big company, Fortune 10 kind of industry. The computer people are going to end up defining this industry. Already today, the monitoring and control systems are computers, very often, sadly, Windows 7. Sometimes even OS 2, I've heard, but never witnessed recently. Those systems are still in place. We're starting to have some communications over different proprietary systems, over open systems. If you have not studied the vulnerability to hacking of our energy systems in the United States, you should be really terrified. And if you go out and read how much of the U.S. grid you can take down from remote hacking, and the likelihood that China and Russia have a red button they could take down our entire grid is very realistic. We almost certainly can do it to them, and which is why they haven't done it to us. But the first thing Russia did in Ukraine is they took out all their communications and electric infrastructure remotely. They all got it going again, but Russia is known to have taken out the Ukraine grid way before the war started as a test run, and they took out a whole city with a remote hack, the whole grid. It was down for 18 hours, and for those of you in the computer space, they bricked the controllers remotely. And so if you go and read the smartest people who think about the grid, what do? Their answers are universally, we need lots of small distributed systems built like the internet. So policy on energy is incredibly slow, highly politicized. But in the end, the structure of this distributed autonomous systems that we've already seen proven at scale on the internet will absolutely be the future of energy. So whether it's in 5 years or 25 years, for those of you in the computer industry that are experts in distributed computing, in resiliency and security, this industry is going to come knocking at your door. So be ready, and dear Lord, please help them, because they need it. Thank you very much.